All right, well, thank you everyone for joining this video today, and welcome to this presentation on the Introduction to the Analysis and Use of Data. So this presentation is part of a series of videos and accompanying workshops that are part of this ROMA Next Generation video series. And so this is really focusing in on implementing the ROMA cycle in the next generation performance management framework. And so we have a couple presenters with us today, Barbara Mooney and Frederick Richmond, and they are going to be presenting the content that's going to be in this video presentation. And I am Courtney Kohler. I'm the Senior Associate from the Community Action Partnership. And so on behalf of the partnership, we welcome you to this video series. There's 5 different modules that are a part of this series, and you can see those here on your screen. And these can be used in no particular order, and they also, like I said earlier, have the accompanying workshops that can be modified to the use of the agency and go deeper into each topic. And so today we're going to be really focusing in on that analysis and the use of data, and we're going to be talking about the key concepts behind the analysis and the use of data, looking at what else we need to know to improve agency decision making. So we hope that this is a very helpful introduction, and hope that you would consider how a workshop might be helpful, and how this workshop might be able to be adapted to the needs of the agency, as far as whether it might be a half day or a full day, or split up between different meetings or trainings. And so to introduce our presenters today, we have Barbara Mooney, the Director of the Association for Nationally Certified ROMA Trainers. She's the co-author of Introduction to ROMA, a research fellow for the National Association for State Community Services Programs, a consultant to the Community Action Partnership, regional coordinator for the Region 3 Performance Innovative Consortium, and the contributing author to Temple University's Strengths-Based Family Worker curriculum. So over the past 5 years, she's worked on the development of the OCS Performance Management Framework. And this video series accompanies a lot of that work. And then we also have Frederick Richmond. He's the co-author of the Introduction to ROMA curriculum, a ROMA master trainer, and he also serves on the board of ANSERT. Fred is the president of the Center for Applied Management Practices, or CAMP, and is working in the network to produce service delivery system practices, data collection and storage technology, and to assist in clarifying the use of data for improvement. So this process we're going to discuss today really complements other processes within the ROMA cycle. So we really hope that you kind of keep in mind the ROMA cycle, as well as all of those connections within it, and how the analysis and use of data works within that. So now I'll turn it over to Fred and let him get started.
Thank you so much, Courtney, and a pleasure to be here. So let's take a look at what is data. And first of all, we have used the word data and datum. Data is a plural word, but over the years it has been accepted as both singular and plural use. So for the sake of this presentation today, we're going to use data universally. So please, this is simply more or less the standard, and that's how we will use it throughout the material. So we take a look at data. Essentially, we think about facts or a well-defined set of objects, numbers, responses, and data is something that we can use for practical purposes. We talk about raw data, and that's something that's in the vernacular. Raw data is something that's unprocessed, and we tend to think about these as facts, numbers, qualitative or quantitative, qualitative, the L letters, quantitative, the N numbers. Essentially, it's a collection of different pieces of information. Well, not information, we should limit it to data. Essentially, when we look at raw data, there is meaning, but for it to be more meaningful, we need to analyze that data and turn data into something more practical information. We make a distinction between data, information, and knowledge. Data are facts. They are observed, measured, or in this case, data is facts, observed, measured, collected, and can be aggregated, assembled together to get us a bigger picture. Data by itself needs to be applied. And we think about data becomes information, and the application is analysis. We analyze those discrete numbers, those pieces of information, and it expands the value of that data into information. The third step is knowledge. And knowledge comes from the interaction of that information and experience with the topic. So we tend to think of these three things in sequence sort of as the foundation for data analysis. Let's take an example here. Some of you may recognize that this is Mount Everest, and the data that we have about Mount Everest, it is over 29,000 feet. The information that we have is we know that there are other elements. It could be snow, location, travel, time of year. And when we put the data and the information together, we get a better understanding of how all of this adds up to the task of climbing and survival of a climber. We know, for example, we wouldn't climb in the middle of the storm. We would probably climb in a part of the year where there was less snow, things like that. So by assembling it all, the knowledge, we act on the data. We collect the discrete elements. The analysis of that data gives us broader information, and the knowledge is something we ultimately act on. We have what's called the basic collection and analysis cycle. You can see at the top, we start with data collection. We enter the data into a storage device or mechanism. We pull the data out of that storage device and we aggregate it. We add together individual data elements to give us a bigger picture. We analyze that data and turn it into information. And we make decisions, informed decisions based on that information. So while this is also a cycle, we can enter any places at the cycle at any time. Once we've collected and stored the data, we need to clean it. And you've probably heard that term, cleaning data. And by cleaning data, we want to make the best quality data available. Some of the bigger pictures of remove outliers. An outlier is something that we know just doesn't belong. Obvious errors, the more experienced you are with this, the more likely you to spot an error. And of course, a significant one, missing data. If we're missing data, you can see how this would affect the whole sort of data supply chain, and that we would be unable to draw certain conclusions or analysis if we're missing key data elements. The next thing we do is we aggregate the data. We bring the data elements together, we define, we make comparisons. And if you can see in this particular chart here, the arrow is pointing towards the pink shaded bar, and that represents strawberry. And if we look at our scale on the left, 1 to 10, would indicate that based on a score of some sort, strawberry wins. It has the highest score. So essentially, we have used that data to compare it to other fruits and essentially create the concept. We have visualized it, we make comparisons, we define and clarify the context. Flawed data. We're talking about an outlier here. And if you could see on top of each of these bars, there is a T. And we have that red arrow pointing because, in fact, they all look alike. The heights are different, but as you can see here, the height between the top of the T and the top of the purple bar is significantly higher. So if 4 out of 5 of those are the same, it's reasonable to conclude that that particular presentation, the bar chart or histogram, the one in the middle is an outlier. So what happens if the data is flawed? If it is flawed, well, there's some certain obvious things. One, we do all this work, we waste time and money. False impressions, we analyze something and the data analysis is incorrect, so we draw conclusions that are not useful. We can't use that data to forecast, project out the future because it is flawed, and it significantly affects one's decision making. In other words, if you put yourself on the line, you pull that information analysis together, and it's faulty, therefore your credibility drops, and the decisions that make it in turn also are not the best. I'm going to turn this over to Barbara, who will continue with the presentation.
Thanks, Fred. That's a good start on our discussion, and I get to move us forward to look at turning data into information. And of course, the purpose of that is to be able to use the data so that we increase our knowledge and improve the decision-making power of our agencies. There's a growing amount of data at our fingertips, really thanks to the technology and to just the availability of more data collection processes. So So we know that that data analysis can be difficult. And what we're going to do is provide a brief introduction and overview to this topic, primarily so that community action professionals can start to think about what information they need to gather or that they can get from the data so that they can look at their own agency reports and community needs assessment data and other sources of information. As I said, there are a lot of different ways to analyze data. And there are some on the screen, data mining, business intelligence, and so on. And these are all different ways to help us to look at the facts, the figures, the stories of that we're looking at to produce useful information. There's some conclusions that can be suggested, and it supports decision making. Probably the first kind of analysis that you're going to use when you're looking at your data is counting. Counting how many. This is really an important factor. How many things have you provided, have you produced, have you participated in? You might be looking at the number of individuals and families that you served, or further, how many came to the agency, and of those that came to the agency, how many did you serve? Did you serve them all? How many services did they get? Did they get multiple services? And how many outcomes, of course, did they get? We might also be looking at assessment data, how many people were in need of a certain thing, and then we may look at the resources, how many dollars we have. So we'd be counting a number of different things. And we really want to know what that count means. Are the numbers showing that we're doing good? In some cases, your funding sources will only be looking for counts. How many did you serve? However, as we know, with the results orientation, we always also want to know what the counts mean. So we move to the second kind of technique, another kind of technique for analysis, and it's called comparing data. And this is a very powerful technique, and it can also be simple. Almost anyone in your agency can look at two things and say, are they similar or are they different? So the task of the agency is to set up different kinds of comparisons that are going to produce useful information. And so a good comparison is one that meets your needs. One of the first things that you'll be comparing is your actual program data with the projections that you made before you started to serve, before you started the year. How many were projected to serve, how many were actually served, how many were projected to achieve the outcome, and how many actually achieved the outcome. You might be doing some longitudinal comparison, meaning comparison over time or from year to year. If you look at the quantities of service or the population over time, you might be able to consider what's been happening. You might be able to see the changes that have happened over time, and that will help you to understand what you might want to do going forward, what the future might bring. You'll also be comparing your local data with national data. If you know that in the national data that the population is very low income and that about a third of the population served naturally are children, you might be able to see how your population compares with that and then make some decisions based on that. You're always going to want to compare with your needs assessment data. Remember what you identified about the needs and then consider, did we meet those needs? And another comparison might be comparing with other agencies. What do other agencies who have similar outcomes, what do they achieve? Do they deliver the services in a similar way? And is the population similar? So those are some of the questions that you might ask to determine whether or not there's a comparison between your services and another agency's. I'll turn it over to Fred to talk about identifying the trend.
Thank you, Barbara. Let's now talk about identifying the trend. And when we talk about a trend, what we're looking at data elements over time, what we sometimes call a trend line. So why do we want to identify trends? Well, these are two significant questions. Are things changing or are they staying the same? This significantly affects the type of programming, resources, anything how an organization delivers services we need to know. So let's take a look at examples of things that impact our service delivery system. When we look at demographics, a population can change. During the recession several years ago, a lot of people came into community action agencies who had never been low income. It changed the dynamics of services in terms of the services, people, etc. We needed to know that. We also learned later on that that was a temporary situation. Opportunities for employment. We know that there are areas where all of a sudden corporations come in, there's jobs. We know there are areas where corporations leave. Those are the type of things that affect, those type of trends affect what we do and how we do it. Environmental changes, recent examples of hurricanes and flooding, and in terms of storms, those could change. Many things that affect the way we deliver services, the ability to change that. Opportunities for recreation, again, attracts healthy communities, healthy neighborhoods. Another example is healthcare professionals, facilities, and systems. We know that, of course, that having quality professionals to take care of our health is important. We need to know if those things are staying the same or are they changing, how will that affect our populations? And there are many other examples, but knowing trend data is critical. Here is an example using teen pregnancies. Now, if you look here, you will see that from 1970 to 2010, we have a 40-year trend. If we had simply looked at, for example, the year 2000, you would not know at that moment where that trend was. So, for example, if you just looked at the year 2000, you might look at that and think that the rate for African Americans was high compared to others. But in fact, if you look overall, from the year 1990 to through 2010, there was a significant decrease in teen pregnancy rates. So I want to point out that there are two data elements here that are critical. One, the point in time count, so you get those counts, but your whole programming and your decisions to deliver services have to be based on a broader examination of trends. So you can see in this case that this is a significant issue that is changing and the resulting drop in teen pregnancy rate, and you would alter your services accordingly. I'm going to turn this over to Barbara.
Okay, thank you. So, of course, it's important for you to be able to use those trends to figure out what caused the trend to turn. You want to analyze that data and then be able to use it. So we have a little fun story. Consider this story about a quaint little town in New England. And we're going to have you compare two sets of data. Now, what happens when those data elements are related, but they're not really dependent on one another? Then in that case, you're going to have to look for other data elements. So in our fun example, it turns out that ice cream sales increased in the month of July, and so did drowning. So the residents of this little town petitioned the mayor to ban ice cream sales in order to save people from drowning. Now, the mayor was very astute, and he knew about analysis of data. And so he said, let's think if there might be something else at play here. So he looked at the drowning, and he looked at the ice cream sales charts, And he also said, I think there's something else happening here, rising temperatures. So as the weather warms, people eat more ice cream, and they also might have more incidents of drowning because they're swimming. So this is how data analysis could help help to save the town from banning ice cream. Sometimes we make incorrect analysis when we look at our agency data and we say that there might be a cause of something when really there's a correlation, but we haven't used all the data that's available to us. We need to be able to see that there may be a third factor at play, and remember that as we move forward, that there's always more information that you can get to dig deeper to help you make some conclusions. So Courtney's going to bring us home with some summaries on this.
All right. What you heard today can be summarized through the following points on your screen. So you want to be sure that your data is clean. So we talked about your data being accurate, it being complete, as well as timely. We also talked about a few different techniques that can be used for data analysis that are fairly simple. So starting out with just counting, also comparison, and then looking at trends. And then also looking at, identifying what else you need to know and how data can be utilized. So we hope that this presentation has been helpful. And just a reminder that there is a workshop that is accompanying this video, and it can be used in a variety of ways, like I mentioned at the beginning. So it's something that really can meet your agency's needs and go deeper into the different types of data analysis, teaching staff how to utilize it to enhance the implementation of the ROMA cycle. And so if you have any questions about that or want more information, we do have all of these materials on the communityactionpartnership.com website. So if you go under Tools and Resources, you will find these ROMA Next Generation videos as well as the workshop materials, and as well as many other helpful resources. And then, of course, you can contact any of us at any time if you have any questions or would like for any technical assistance on how to facilitate the workshops. So we hope that this information has been helpful, and we appreciate you tuning in, and hope that you all have a great day. Thank you.